Welcome to another installment of Airsoft Reports. Today we're going to take a look at the new JG Steyr AUG. Now as usual, we want to see what the AUG can do on the range and what velocity it's firing at. So we're going to fire a string of 5.2 gram high precision BBs through our chronograph and get the averages from that. Let's take a look. Now there you can see that the highs and lows, they average out to be about 315 or so FPS. Again, we're using the 0.2 gram BBs. Now here we're using 0.25 gram high precision BBs to give you an idea of the drop in velocity. So take a look at those numbers. A drop from an average of about 315 down to somewhere just below 270. Now, of course, you get greater accuracy with the 0.25, but you're going to be sacrificing quite a bit of velocity. You're looking at the new Steyr AUG from JG. Now, this gun has a lot to offer. It has a high polymer content, and it actually holds true to the real steel in that regard. But it also has a large amount of metal in the body as well, which a lot of people will like. The gun performs quite well, as you'll see in the firing report. But before we get to that, we're going to show you some features on the gun. We'll start with the battery compartment. To access it, you simply pop off the rubber butt plate, which is accomplished by just prying it off. Nothing fancy holds it on, it's held on by friction. Forms a fairly tight seal when it's in place. And once that's popped off, the battery itself and the compartment is exposed. Now with the butt plate off, you can get a pretty good view of the battery compartment. It exposes a relatively small space that's really good for only holding the stock battery size, maybe slightly larger. They give you an 8.4 volt 1100 milliamp battery, and as you can see, there's not much room for really anything else. Behind the battery compartment is actually the mech box, and that's another nice thing about this particular AEG. From what we've seen, access and maintenance, even upgrading the mech box, should be pretty easy. Now once you've got the battery back in place, you can reattach the butt plate, which is a fairly simple affair. If you squeeze the sides of the rubber butt plate a little bit while you're putting it back on, it makes it a little bit easier. Now the magazine holds 330 rounds in high capacity form and is fairly straightforward. There is a little bit of slop in the magazine well, which isn't really too bad in terms of how it performs mechanically. It really doesn't detract from anything, but it is somewhat of an irritation. Releasing the magazine is also pretty simple. Push up on the lever into the buttstock. Releasing the magazine, you can see there's a little foot on the magazine which keeps it firmly in place while it's inside the well. Putting it back is also equally simple. Push it all the way up, shoehorn it in, and you're in business. You can also see on the magazine that it has the identifying marks where in the real steel you'll be able to see roughly how many cartridges are in the magazine itself. Alright, let's take a look at the disassembly latch. Now the disassembly latch is used to remove the entire front receiver from the frame of the gun, and this is a pretty unique feature, especially in airsoft. One thing to watch out for though is that this little piece can come out pretty easily, and there's really no stopper on it, so it can actually slide all the way out. That's not a part you want to lose in the middle of a firefight. And we'll show you more about the disassembly a little bit later on. But now, let's take a look at the trigger and safety assembly. Now the safety system on the Steyr AUG is pretty unique as well. It's easily used though, and when the button is pushed all the way to the right, you'll see a small white dot, which we'll show you here, which signifies that the gun is on safe. Now when it's pushed all the way to the left, you'll see also another red dot, which signifies that the airsoft gun is ready to fire. It's easily used with one hand, and we like that. Let's show you the trigger system now. Now the trigger on the Steyr AUG is fairly unique in that it does not have any dedicated fire selection switch. In fact, it is an all-in-one device. When you pull the trigger back partially, it fires a single shot. when you pull it back all the way, you're in full auto. Now, of course, we've unloaded the gun for this demonstration, but we wanted to give you a pretty good idea of how it functions. In reality, it's actually quite useful, and it allows you to switch from a sniping role to fire suppression quite easily and quickly. Now, the Steyr AUG comes equipped with a full metal rail, which is actually attached to the front portion of the all-metal receiver. And this is actually quite nice because it gives the gun a very solid, very hefty feel. It does add a bit of weight, but we do generally like the way it holds up. Now, the rail itself is actually quite wide. It's wider than some of the rails we've encountered on stock airsoft guns, and what that means is that you're going to have to get some scope mounts that can accommodate the width of the rail. For example, some of the BB gun scopes that we had lying around with their various scope mounts were simply too narrow. We went out to our local department store and got a couple extra. Those will set you back about 15 bucks, so be prepared. Now, the iron sights, or rather plastic sights that come on the Steyr AUG are quite bad. It seems like the designers really plan for the user to use some kind of optical attachment, but we're going to show it to you anyway. Now, because we mount a scope on this for our firing report, we've only mounted the one sight. In fact, the sights are identical. You could interchange the front or the back. We'll just show you the way it looks here. Let's take a look. Now, it's a flip-up sight. Fairly simple, but pretty crude. You really can't get any precise aiming with this device. And like we said, they're interchangeable. So this is the rear sight, and of course, if you needed the front sight, you would simply pivot it. You see how wide the little tip is. It's really not very precise at all. Really, you're going to be aiming down the barrel more than you'll be using this thing here. The scope, though, is quite useful, and we'll show you that a little bit later on. Now, the foregrip on the Steyr AUG is another unique part of the entire gun. Unfortunately, it also seems to be probably the weakest link on this particular airsoft AEG. It feels quite flimsy, probably because of the fact that it is just hollow plastic with a very thin aluminum piece connecting it to the actual frame itself. Now, if it's any consolation, this is a complaint that a lot of Tokyo Marui users have as well. So though it may be flimsy, it seems to be a pretty good copy of the Tokyo Marui version. Now, it does flip up, and you do that by pulling down and then simply pivoting up. So of course, in this position, it's locked. Though, again, as I said, it's a little flimsy feeling. Depending on what you're doing, if you're lying on the grass, you might want to have it up. If you're trying to operate in closer quarters, you might want it down. Either way, it's something that could be replaced, and we haven't technically had it break off or really malfunction at all yet. So really, we haven't encountered any problem with it as of yet. Now, many of you will be happy to know that the front flash hider is removable, and you could put in its place either an alternate flash hider or perhaps a sound suppressor of some sort. You're going to have to remove the little metal clip and or the little Allen screw, which is actually holding the entire little thing in place. It's a pretty simple affair. We're not going to do it here for you now because it's really just a matter of removing that screw and then just screwing it off.